So in this video, I'm going to cover emergency accommodation. So a little bit about myself, my background. I was originally an apprentice at my local authority. I went and worked in the homelessness prevention team, homelessness relief team, dealing with emergency accommodation and their private letting side. And then worked for a social housing association, Southern Housing, which is one of the largest in the country, and they have 77,000 units at the time. I think probably more now, definitely more now. And so I've got a good experience and background within social housing. And then for the last 3 years, I've been working with local authorities providing emergency accommodation to them. So we're going to break it down, understand what it is, understand sort of the legislation behind it as well, because those things are sort of important to know and familiarize yourself with, especially when you're going to be talking to local authorities as well. It's really impressive if you know the actual legislation and laws in place. You know, that's definitely going to put you above the rest of the people who are also approaching. And yeah, we're just going to break it down so you can get an understanding of what it is and why we do it. So, emergency accommodation is housing provided by local councils to individuals or families who are at risk of homelessness or are homeless. Okay, so they have legal duties under the legislation to provide temporary accommodations to people who are eligible. This is called a statutory duty. So it means they have a legal obligation to provide this type of accommodation to people who need it. So service accommodation operators for people like us, it's a great sort of source of bookings, especially longer term bookings. There's no seasonality with it. We'll get into that a little bit later, but it definitely could be a great second income stream for one property, or a second way of additional way of receiving bookings and getting bookings for your properties, as well as doing service accommodation Airbnb. So let's understand the legislation itself. So you've got the Housing Acts 1996, and then you've got different sections. So this is just important to note. But obviously, if you can bring these up and regurgitate them when you're speaking to these to the councils, this is going to really, really be impressive. So Housing Act section 188, interim duty to accommodate. Again, that's just talking about how emergency accommodation is a statutory duty, a legal obligation for councils to provide to people in need. So main duty is I would look at main duty as a framework to decide if somebody is eligible for the process. So if somebody has been deemed to be intentionally homeless, so we can see they might provide bank statements and things like that to show their income. If their income, they've got a good income stream and they just refuse to pay their landlord and they got kicked out and now they're facing homelessness, then they're intentionally homeless because they could have prevented it. And that therefore the council don't see them as eligible for emergency housing. So I hope you're sort of catching the drift at the moment. Then it's talking about main priority. So who's going to be the top of that queue? Single mothers, people pregnancies, people pregnant, anyone that's got small young children. They're obviously going to be main priority. There could also be sort of mothers who flee in domestic violence, those kind of things, because obviously, their needs are greater than everybody else. So that's that act talking about that. And then the Homelessness Reduction Act 2017 was a new legislation that came in to say that councils need to be seen trying to prevent homelessness 56 days before it happens. Okay, obviously that is difficult depending on when they find out about it, but they need to be seen to be actively preventing it. And then also the relief of it as well. If somebody then has turned homeless or become homeless or moved into emergency accommodation, they need to support them for a minimum of 56 days afterwards as well. So actually, what is emergency accommodation? It's short-term housing used when someone has nowhere safe to stay, typically provided by the councils, depending on their situation. And yeah, a lot of the time, the councils will use hotels, hostels, B&Bs in the area. It's cheap, and they can put them into a room. But sometimes, obviously, it's not very what's the one I'm looking for? It's not a sort of a great idea really if you're putting a family of 4 or 5 into a room in a hotel, or you split them across 2 rooms in a hotel. And now it's actually more expensive than if they just approach us. So that's where we come in. We normally typically take in families, couples. There's normally children, mothers fleeing domestic violence, those kind of cases, because either there are too many people for one hotel room or B&B, and therefore then they would have to get 2 rooms, and then to get 2 rooms is more expensive than actually just coming to us, and they get a full serviced property. They'd get looked after. I know what I've previously worked with the councils, so I know exactly how they need to be treated and go about it and so on. And then I'm going to teach you this as well. So again, who uses emergency accommodation? Families have been evicted or made homeless, so they might have received a Section 21, which is going to be abolished soon, but they may have, previously, they may have received a Section 21. Individuals fleeing domestic abuse, of course, their top priority to get them out of that danger. Unsafe due to fire, flood, or structural issues. We've had a couple of those as well, where there was an accidental fire that happened in the middle of the town where we're from, and that family had to then be placed quickly by the council, so they came and approached us. Leaving hospitals, no care or accommodation, and then obviously people really vulnerable might be coming out of prison, refugees in vulnerable places, addiction problems. Of course, most of the time they're individuals. If they have those type of vulnerabilities, they're typically individuals. So we won't necessarily see them in our accommodation unless we might have a studio or 1 bed. But typically most of the time we're looking at larger families, etc., fleeing domestic violence, preventing them from being homeless. So different ways they source the properties. Obviously, they have a network of landlords. Each council will have a network of landlords they use from the private rented sector. But we want to, we're obviously staying clear of the private rented sector, because that's not what we're interested in. They obviously use service accommodation partners, large organisations with lots of properties. Okay. Oh yeah, and some councils will use a procurement framework. So there might be a tender, and a tender is just an online contract or sort of application for winning work off the council. So they might put it out on their procurement website and say, we need a company who can do this, this, and this, and then you apply yourself to that and say, my company can do all of those things, and then they'll review it, do an interview process, and then sort of choose a company to win that contract. So obviously the requirements for working with the council, if they accept you, they bring you on as a registered supplier, they put you through their books into their system, then the properties obviously need to be clean, safe, and fully furnished, which they will be anyway. We need to have all the safety regulations, the EBC, gas safety, EICR. We should have those anyways as a property managers or as rent-to-renters. Smoke alarm, carbon monoxide alarms, again, standard. We're going to always have those. It's got to be suitable for the household size the council intends to place. So if it's a 4 bed, if it's 5 people, you're not going to put them into a 1 bed. The council aren't going to accept that. It's got to be suitable for the placement that they need. So it's always good to have at a later date when you're scaling is to have a variety of different types of properties: 1 beds, 2 beds, 3 beds, 4 beds, and then you can accommodate for any inquiry that comes through. And then this is one as well. The property must have child window safety locks, especially if you're in a flat or on the upstairs of a house. Anything like that is really important. They've got the safety locks, so they can't open the window fully. It's just for the case, of course, the children, to protect them. And there also needs to be a cot at every property as well. Just in case, of course, of a baby, a youngster who needs that. It's just one of their things that they put in place, that there needs to be a cot in the property in case of that. So what's the reason why we're doing it, really? Because you're probably thinking, surely this could be a bit more of a hassle. Is the income even better? And yeah, it does depend. And sometimes it can be a hassle. Sometimes the income isn't as great, but there's much better benefits to this. So consistent occupancy levels. If we get a inquiry and a booking come through from the councils, then they're typically in there for longer term. They're longer than 2 months. Most of the time we've had 11-month bookings, 10-month bookings, 9 months. Sometimes we have had like a month. Just because of someone's situation, they've then worked out that actually they're not they've then worked out that they are intentionally homeless, so they've then gone, all right, we're taking your placement away, meaning they've had to then exit the property. But typically the long term, there's no seasonality at all with it. It could be all year round. Someone could become homeless or be at risk of homelessness all year round. So there's no choice in that, and that's great for us, because that means when we have maybe a bit of a lower month, sort of January and February, that means we can cover it with sort of council bookings. It can be guaranteed payments. They do sometimes offer block bookings, so that is just a short contract, and they basically say, well, for this 6-month period, we're going to pay you a guaranteed fixed rate for 6 months every month. It is going to be lower than the nightly rate, but you still might be able to sort of negotiate it, so you're earning £500, £400, something of that nature, and then the council can sort of bring people in and out of the property as they want, because they're paying you, essentially a lease for that time period. So payments can also be made on a weekly basis by the council, which is great for cash flow. There's no guest marketing. And we don't have to keep looking at pricing strategies or marketing strategies. It's either they call us up or email over and say, is this available right now? And we go yes or no, and that's it. Then we take their details, we call them, we check the person in to the property, make sure they're comfortable, then make sure they understand how all the amenities work, how the oven works, what not to touch and what they can do, and etc. And sort of just give them a lowdown and make them feel comfortable in the space. And the potential for longer term bookings, because they typically are longer term, as they're waiting to find them more permanent accommodation. We're just the interim emergency middle ground, and then once they find them more permanent accommodation to move on to, they will obviously then call up to end that booking or that placement. So of course, it will help reduce the turnovers and cleaning frequency, which is always handy. The issues that do come along with it means the rates might be slightly lower than the peak Airbnb nightly prices. So that's just something to take into account. But because it's longer term, it normally works itself out. Obviously, we have to maintain communication with the councils at all times. So that can in itself is a constant job that we're always doing. We're always speaking with the local authorities and their team, seeing how they are, seeing if they require anything further. They're asking us questions, seeing how the guest is behaving, and all of these different things. Yes, there is additional reporting or compliance requirements that's dependent on each council. They have different requirements, to become a registered supplier. So you just need to find out what those are. Certain councils won't pay any damage deposits. So again, you have to take the risk that if somebody does damage something, that you're going to be able to cover it with the insurance, or you're going to be able to cover it from just the profit that you're making at the end of the month. Each councils have their own budgets depending on the situation. So some councils are broke, and when I say broke, they're like essentially liquidation broke. So they have no budget whatsoever to put towards emergency accommodation. So they might even offer like £10 a night, which is obviously just ridiculous. Like we can't even have a conversation about £10 a night. We'll make a loss, and you would make a loss. It's not worth it. So each council is going to be different. So it's worth just speaking to multiple to find out what their budgets are, what they can actually afford. Because sometimes it's not going to be worth your time. Most local authorities will only work with companies of a certain size and experience, because of course, imagine if they're dealing with 10 smaller companies, it's going to be so much more admin and hassle than if they deal with one company that can provide all their accommodation needs. So again, you might start speaking to a council and start making those inquiries, and they're going to turn around and say, we've actually already got somebody in place. And at the end of the day, if you've only got a couple properties or a few units, they might not necessarily take you seriously enough to actually bring you on as a registered supplier. But then again, you're sort of back up to that could be, well, if you're the main company you're using can't necessarily accommodate for any bookings, then you want a fallback option. And so at least you could try with that route to get you in, and hopefully at some stage they will then start providing you some form of bookings. Local authorities will naturally push you towards their private lettings department. You need to understand that people you're talking to are just working their typical 9 to 5. They're not as invested in what you're talking about as you are, because obviously this is our life. This is what we want to do. We're building a business. It's for us. Whilst they're working 9 to 5, so you need to make sure that you do speak to the correct person, and it can be difficult because there's a lot of bureaucracy within the councils where the different departments don't necessarily speak to each other. So you need to make sure that you are speaking to the temporary accommodation or emergency accommodation officer or team. Okay, and that is vital because other departments won't know what you're talking about or won't care to try and understand or pass your query over. So you need to make sure you get to that specific person or team to then have these discussions. So a little side note, little thing for you to know and learn, it's not necessarily going to affect you, is local housing allowance rates, or LHAR. Each council will have the districts will have different local housing allowance rates. And these are just budgets set by the council, which is what housing benefit typically pay out depending on if it's a 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed, 4 beds, and there's different rates within them. Okay, so this is what the councils will always try to push for local housing allowance rates, because that's what they want to pay a landlord to accommodate a family. But we're not doing that because we're not keeping that family on a permanent long-term basis. We just want them on a short-term nightly rate, if that makes sense. So the local housing allowance rates are seriously outdated, really outdated, and they wouldn't even beat the AST market rates. So for us, it's completely not profitable at all. We can't do it. Would make a loss. So you need to stay clear of any discussions about local housing allowance rates, private lettings. That's not what we do, and that's not how we're going to make income out of this. So different ways to approach the local authorities. As I mentioned before, you need to speak to the right person. Housing or homelessness department, temporary accommodation homelessness prevention officer is another one. So emergency accommodation officer, temporary accommodation officer, and the team. But homelessness prevention as a whole is, you can speak to somebody from there. You can try that again. Send an email introducing your accommodation availability. Do not approach them if you don't have any properties. Yeah, you only approach them once you have a few properties, because it's just going to be a waste of everyone's time. They want people they can actively work with right now, here and there, that they can register and start going with. So if you don't have anything available or don't have any properties, do not contact them, because it will just only come back to you at a later date when you do try contact them with properties. So just don't do that yet. So obviously you've got to call the department and request a discussion surrounding emergency accommodation provision. Okay, we're not talking about private lettings. We're not talking about the local housing allowance rates. Emergency accommodation only. And then obviously provide the details of any properties you might have, and obviously explain exactly how we operate. We don't be mentioning words Airbnb, service accommodation. It's just not required. Do not say that. Say the properties are set up as serviced apartments, as serviced houses, fully equipped, all the white goods, everything that somebody would possibly need, and it's specifically set up for emergency accommodation purposes. Okay, so we've got a little outreach here, a little message that you could use. Of course, just change it to your situation, and just put a bit of the personal touch on there. So in conclusion, for everything that I spoke about today, I know that this is a bit of a long one, but emergency accommodation is just a partnership with a local authority to house vulnerable people in terms of if they're becoming homeless or they are homeless. And it can work great in unison with serviced accommodation, because one property we can have it marketed on Airbnb and booking.com, or we can have the council come and call us and book the property as well. So it's a great form of different avenue of getting bookings.